Welcome to The Big Picture. I'm Phil Arno. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day. Pretty interesting guy, a former professional hockey player. Pretty famous, as a matter of fact. Now, I shouldn't mention any names, but Marcel is a Hall of Famer, one of the top scorers in the history of the NHL. So he should know his stuff, right? Well, as a former football player, I got into it a little bit with him. He was going on and on about which sport is tougher, had better athletes. You know the drill. Who would you rather have walking down a dark alley with you, I said. A tough lineman or a hockey player? He said, well, depends on what kind of a stick the hockey player had. Then he said, football players never have to run more than 10 seconds at a time, and then they're out of breath. My socks are tougher than a football player. I said, well, hockey players get a cut on their lip, and they're out for the season. He said, give me any football player, anybody you know. I'll stand him up in front of the net for 1 minute without a mask, instant retirement. Well, I'll tell you what I did. I decided that before we dropped our gloves and went at it, this former bench-warming college quarterback might not be a match for the hot-headed NHL former Hall of Famer. So I'll turn to some real football players to take over the conversation and make fun of hockey players when they're not here to beat us, to defend themselves. And so on this slightly different big picture, today I'd like to welcome some former Buffalo Bills, Lou Picone, Ed Rutkowski, and my favorite cornerback, Booker Edgerson. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you very much.
Glad to be here.
Great.
Well, the first question is, who's tougher, football players or hockey players?
Well, I had a conversation with Rick Martin and Danny Gear before about who's the toughest and what game is the toughest. And I said, well, football is the toughest. It's the most brutal and all that. And they said, no, it's hockey. I said, well, look. I said, how many games do hockey play? They said 80. I said, how many games do football play? 16. I said, that tells you right then that football is more violent and more tougher than hockey, because if not, they'd be playing 80 games too. And so Danny basically said, yeah, I guess you're right on that.
Well, you know what, I think it's an argument that's going to go on forever and ever, but the conditioning and the size of the players constantly gets bigger, and they're faster, and it's a profession, it's a business, so they're growing them tough now.
These guys are physical freaks.
It's amazing. If one question that I always think about, in 1964, 65, to me, it was amazing. Those teams were the greatest Buffalo Bills teams. I was mesmerized looking at those guys. If those guys, you guys, were at your peak and you played a present day team, would it be a contest, or because of all the advances and the speed and the size, would you have your heads handed to you?
They'd be going through their roster as fast as they could sign them up because of the rule changes. Mm-hmm. Okay, when you watch today, it's just different because of the head trauma, the concussions, and so on. They've really relaxed the rules, so you're not putting your head anywhere. If you take your head out of the game, you take the real impact from a standpoint of, when I used to go in the middle, they used to say, or they used to knock you out, take your head off, and say, don't come back in here again. That's basically the message they were relaying to you. They'd knock you out, and they would stand and gloat over you that they just knocked you out.
So they're bigger and faster today, but you have Mike Stratton hit you in the ribs and break your ribs, you're going to be out, right?
They're bigger, faster, but the rule changes have lessened the severe impacts. That's the way I look at it now.
Well, it'd be a good contest. If the Super Bowl would have been held in 1965, the Browns against the Bills, who would have won?
You only had 33. Remember, you only had 33 men on the roster.
Yeah.
So you had a lot more. You had a lot more play.
Okay.
I believe you know, we had this argument one other time, you know, with Browns and the Bills, and the matchups and everything. And I really believe that we would have beat the Browns. And you know, a lot of folks said, well, you know, they got Jim Brown. And I said, yeah. I said, we have Cookie Gilchrist. You know, and I said, we had Albert Dubinion. You had Butch Bird at one corner, myself at the other corner, George Sames, Tom Sistak, Ron McDowell, Tom Day. You know, I said, you know, I just could not see. And I think during that time, we had the lowest average gain of teams playing against us on yardage and everything, and also pass yardage. So I think that we would have beat the Cleveland Browns. Not hands down, but I think overall we would have beat them. And it had nothing to do with the National Football League and American Football League. It had to do with the individual's ability to play the game of football. And I think the coaching would have been the killer right there. Lou Saban, especially in '64, because that's when he was here, is that he would have been the equal to a Lombardi or a George Halas.
Yeah, we do a trivia game show here on the station, Bragging Rights, and just this morning when I was thinking about doing the show, I did a little research, so I came up with a trivia question that I'm going to ask on one of these shows. Who was the first head coach for the Boston Patriots, the New England Patriots? You guys know?
Hollaback?
Mike Hollaback.
Lou Saban.
You know.
Lou Saban was their first coach. I didn't realize that.
Too many concussions here.
Too many. And, you know, and really, I should know that because he left Western Illinois University, where he recruited me at Western Illinois, and became coach with the Boston Patriots. And he took Larry Gaines right along with him, who Larry Gaines became a very outstanding football player with Boston. So I should have known that.
But it's hard to compare, teams in the past with current ball players. I mean, these guys today, they're almost like physical freaks because of the nutrition programs, the training programs, the weight programs. We never had weight training programs. Talk about nutrition. Our pregame meal was a steak, which is like a gut bomb. It takes about a week to digest a steak. We weren't able to drink water during practice or a game. I mean, it's incredible the stuff we went through. We practiced twice a day during preseason, hit every day. That takes wear and tear in your body. These guys today, you go to training camp, it's almost like a country club. You can only practice a certain amount of time. You can't have pads, you can't hit. So it's awfully hard to compare teams in the past with teams today.
Well, I remember driving down the thruway back then, and your training camp was the hotel next to the
Camelot Motor Inn. Yeah.
I can remember seeing you guys throw the ball back and forth. That was your training camp. I mean, to talk about the difference in the profession. You guys, you were making it up as you went, right?
Well, the other side of the coin is that these athletes nowadays they train year round. Where we had to go get a job.
Right.
We couldn't change year round. So that's a big advantage that they have, along with the training that they get anyway, and the food, the nutrition program they put them on. We had to go out and eat hamburgers and hot dogs and whatever else we can scrape up. So there was no such thing as a training table back in those days.
I remember we used to practice at the Camelot Motor Inn, and we were doing two-a-days during the summer. It's August and it's really hot. We're just going through some wind sprints, and John Mays is our offensive backfield coach, and he calls us over and go in the end zone. He says, "Everybody take your helmet off." And he said, "You think it's hot, don't you?" And we said, "Yeah, coach." He says, "Take a look over there." And he points over, and you can see the Bethlehem steel plant. He said, "How'd you like to be working in the blast furnace over there? You guys ought to be thankful that you're playing professional football and not over there working in a blast furnace."
And probably somebody said, "Well, they're making more money than us." So, well, yeah, okay. And you guys used to play in the old War Memorial Stadium. And when I was in high school, I played in that. And those locker rooms were about the size of a small, like closet. Weren't exactly the most luxurious thing in the world. It's a interesting difference there. Now you walk into the locker rooms in New Era Stadium and and it's amazing what they have and the work and the weight room and the jacuzzis that they have, quite a difference.
You know, all that came about from our guys in the early years. You know, you talk about Lou Picone, you know, he was one of the representatives that helped out with the strike back in those days, and he'll talk about that a little bit too. But, you know, we fought for those rights, what those guys are benefiting from right now. We fought for those rights for them. And so I am glad that they're able to have that kind of atmosphere and to be able to come out and play football and give the fans the type of entertainment that they deserve, and also give them the opportunity to make good money that will be able to carry on after football, that they don't have to worry about going and working an 8-hour day job in a factory or in a school system or what may, you know. So I think these guys are amazing to the fact that they're taking advantage of the things that we provided for them as a benefit.
Let me add to put in one thing. Is that fair? And I say fair, F-A-I-R, fairness to athletes in retirement. That's a movement that is trying to include us in a pension parity for what we did. And it's not it's not a guaranteed issue. It's not on the table. It's a moral issue that we got all these. If you look at all the benefits that they've derived from our efforts, they ought to reach. They should reach back and at least elevate the quality of living. You got guys out there that are destitute.
You guys built the league.
Yeah.
You built it. You're the
big
cornerstone.
thing is we were the lab rats for the concussion protocol today. I mean, they didn't know what it was, a concussion. They said, yeah, you got dinged. They pull you out of the game, give you some smelling salts. How many fingers? 2 fingers. Where are you playing in Buffalo? Get your ass back in there, which is the worst thing you could ever do is if he had a concussion. These guys today, their concussion protocol, if they think you had a concussion, you can't have any physical contact for 8 to 10 days, maybe even a week or two, depending on the severity of it. And for us, it was maybe 8 to 10 seconds.
And
So
they only know
to a
about
certain
that.
extent, they morally owe us something because of the guys who have dementia and concussions.
Yeah, exactly. They only know about that now because of the effects on you guys from them.
That started in
That's how they know about it.
That emphasis started when I was a player rep, an executive committee member for the union, and I also was a retired player representative. So I was in the mix following the momentum of things as they changed. And that came around right about 1986, where they started to recognize, because people were starting to have problems. As the evolution of the ball players got older, they started to recognize the fact that, hey, there's dementia, and so they asked me, or we had a write down and count all of your concussions. So I went back and I wrote down all of my concussions. I had 17 of them. Of the 17, about 8 were carry-offs. And if I had 17, I probably had 150, because they call them dings. I mean, those were the ones where you were down and out.
Yeah.
So, and when you think about linemen getting hit in the head so many times, head slaps, they outlawed those a long time ago. But the evolution of the game is bringing it to a point where they try to legislate the game. That some people like it, some people don't.
Well, we're going to take a break now. We'll come back and we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about the money of the game, the business, and maybe what's going on today with the Bills, and a lot to talk about. Fun discussion. We'll be right back. It goes so quickly. We'll be right back after this. Stay tuned.